The words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be ever pleasing in your sight, O God, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. So last year, at least I think it was last year, around this time, a movie came out about Winston Churchill called Darkest Hour. My husband and I rushed to see it because we're huge Gary Oldman fans, and Gary Oldman was playing Churchill, and we're a sucker for just about anything British, so we were going to be at this movie. As we were watching it, one moment kept striking me, and I kept going back to it. And as I tell this story, I'm not going to impersonate Churchill because often I just sound like Sean Connery, and that's no good. But Churchill is facing an uphill battle, to put it mildly. Things are not looking good in World War II. He's about to face a humiliating defeat at Dunkirk. His whole cabinet is basically against him and wants him to sue for peace with Hitler. And he's having a heart-to-heart with the king during one of their normal weekly visits. And somehow they start talking about their parents. And the king asks Churchill, "What are your parents like?" Or "What were your parents like?" And Churchill says, "My mother was very well loved and glamorous, maybe too much so." And then the king asks, "Well, what was your father like?" And Churchill goes, "My father? Well, my father was like God." And the king goes, "How so?" And Churchill goes, "He was occupied elsewhere." And you can understand Churchill's attitude about God in that, and his attitude about his father. Again, he's fighting a war he's not winning. There's humiliating defeat on the horizon. He has no allies. The king is afraid of Churchill and his reputation. Things aren't going well, and it's easy to understand why Churchill would think God is not around. God is occupied elsewhere. And it's very easy for us to fall into that kind of thinking today, isn't it? Kind of a deist understanding of God, where God certainly created the world, but God doesn't seem to care about it much anymore. God put it all into motion, and now God's off doing something different. God can't possibly be here right now, with all the pain and the suffering in the world, with all the partisanship and bickering, with all the difficulty and natural disasters and everything that's going on. It's easy to understand that thought process, isn't it? God's occupied elsewhere. And that's where I wish this Christmas season could always last a little bit longer. Because we only get it for 12 days. But this Christmas season is what reminds us in a very real and very firm way that God has never been and God never will be occupied elsewhere. In fact, that's the furthest thing from God's mind, that God should be out somewhere else, not caring for God's creation. Today we hear that beginning story of God come down to earth. We hear that birth narrative of God coming into the world for us and God coming into the world as truly human. It is a paradox. God is 100% human, born of Mary, a human being, flesh and blood, fallible, and God, Jesus, is also 100% God. 100% divine, the Word made flesh among us. God is both and, but God comes down as a human being to take our lot in our life and to be parts of this world and to experience this world and to say, I'm not giving up on this place and I am part of this creation. And it's important to note in all this that God takes on the human vesture in Jesus Christ. God becomes completely human. Compare that to the Greek and Roman gods and the other stories you hear about gods walking on earth. Think about Zeus walking around. Zeus pretends to be human, but never fully gives up that God factor. Zeus is always God playing human. The Greek gods are always playing human. They get what they need and they want as they walk around, but they never give up their godly nature. And for Christ to come in as fully human, to be the antithesis to that, to say, no, there is something of value here in humanity. There's something to be gained and learned here, and people to be helped by becoming fully part of my creation and my world. We have a God that so loves us that not only did God come down to be among us, but came down to be one of us, to guide us, to love us and help us, a God who physically came into the world through the most unexpected person, in the most unexpected place, with the most unexpected visitors, and in the most unexpected way. In all that, though, we can't say that God was occupied elsewhere. God came down for each and every one of us so that we would not have to climb up to God. God came down to be with us fully, not to lord it over us or to rule over us, but to love us and to show that love to the point of death on a cross. And to lead us into a new way of life, a resurrection life. But the thing is, we don't have Christ physically here with us anymore. We didn't get to hold the baby Jesus. We didn't get to be the shepherd rushing to the manger. And it is easy to forget that God physically came down here to us. But when life gets hard, when we face those struggles and those trials and those tribulations in our lives and we don't know where to turn, it might sound corny, but it helps to remember Christmas. It helps to remember that God has been in the place that you're in. That God has lived a human life and God has experienced pain and death and suffering and despair and difficulty and adversity. And God thought it important to be in all those places. God didn't pull God's self above it, but God leapt and delved into it so God could know and feel and empathize with what we deal with as well. God physically enters into our lives and helps us to learn to show love in a world that wants to hate. So remember the lessons you've learned about Christmas. Remember God coming to us. Remember that God comes in unexpected places and times, and God knows how we feel. And if you're feeling like God isn't there, maybe God's in the place you least expect. At the end of the Churchill movie, it takes some liberties. At least I'm assuming it does. We don't know if any of this actually happened. But Churchill is being pressured again and again to sue for peace. And the king tells him, well, if you can't figure out what to do, go talk to the people. So Churchill boards, at least in the movie, boards a subway train, which is probably something Churchill hadn't done in quite a while, if ever. Because there's always this divide in British culture between the higher people and the lower people, the rich and the not rich, the royalty and the not. And everyone is shocked when the Prime Minister walks onto this train. And he sits down, and first he asks for a match so he can light his cigar. And then as the train starts moving, he says, "How are you holding up?" Everyone kind of mumbles. And he says, "What do you think of what's happening? People are pressuring me to sue for peace. They want me to make peace with Hitler. What do you say I should do?" Without missing a beat, everyone in the train car immediately says that is the absolute worst thing you could do. And we will fight this evil. If it comes down to taking our broomsticks and beating Nazis in the streets, we will defend our island home and beat back the evil of Nazism. And that gave Churchill his answer. And it came from the place that he never wanted to look, When he was looking to his advisors, when he was looking to the king, when he was looking to his wife, all the people he would expect to go to get an answer, no one could give it to him. Yet in the most unexpected place, his answer comes. God comes in the unexpected. God is not absent from us. God is not away from this world. We have to remember that God does show up and has showed up and will continue to show up in unexpected places and unexpected ways. God shows up where we might last look. But God is Emmanuel. God is with us.